In life, sometimes people feel weary and helpless in the face of difficulties that keep appearing without warning. There are days when we still go to work, still laugh and talk with everyone, still fulfill our responsibilities. But inside, we are so utterly drained that there's no energy left to think further. It's not crying, nor is it quite despair, but a quiet, smoldering emptiness. It's as if all our efforts are gradually becoming meaningless. Sometimes we're tired from a mountain of work, from the pressure to succeed, to be capable, to surpass others. Sometimes we're tired because of family, because of the responsibilities of being a child, a parent, a spouse, always fearing we're not good enough. Sometimes we're tired because of money, because of bills, because the weight of future worries seems to rest heavily on our shoulders, even before they arrive. Sometimes we're tired because of relationships, because we give too much, but receive too little, because we try to cling to a relationship that fractured long ago. And sometimes we're just tired because we look around and see everyone rushing, everyone thinking they lack the courage and resilience to face life. But few remember that, as the Buddha taught, suffering is a truth of life. Suffering is not anyone's fault, nor is it a sign of failure. Suffering is simply an inevitable part of the human experience, just like birth, old age, sickness, and death. When we understand this, we will stop blaming ourselves, stop comparing ourselves to others, and begin to look at our weariness with a gentler gaze. There are days when we don't want to take another step, not because we're lazy, but because our minds are overloaded, like a glass filled to the brim with water. Just one more drop could make it overflow. Humans are the same. If we constantly endure, constantly push ourselves without allowing rest, then at some point, exhaustion will set in. The Buddha taught that knowing when to stop at the right time is also a kind of wisdom. It's not about giving up, but about protecting ourselves. It's about catching our breath, seeing clearly where we are, and realizing that our path doesn't necessarily have to be like anyone else's. In daily life, we often cling to results, to success, to everything unfolding exactly as we wish. When that doesn't happen, we suffer, we are disappointed, we torment ourselves. The wisdom of the Dharma reminds us that precisely this clinging is the root cause of suffering. It's like carrying a heavy burden on our back, but refusing to put it down. Even if the road ahead is very long, if we gently ease our grip, we will find our steps much lighter. There are times when life doesn't demand more effort from us, but simply asks us to allow ourselves to see things from a different angle. Instead of asking why we suffer so much, try asking what we have learned from this suffering. Instead of trying to fight against reality, try accepting that some things are beyond our control. The fruit of our actions unfolds in its own way. We reap what we sow. Sometimes the fruit doesn't appear immediately, but that doesn't mean it won't come. Understanding this helps us become less impatient, less pressured to see immediate results. When we're tired, we're allowed to stop. Stop for a moment, to care for our body and mind, to take a sip of water, to take a deep breath, to remind ourselves that we are still alive, still have the opportunity to start over, to correct mistakes, to keep going. Stopping is not an end, but a necessary pause for recovery. When the mind is calmer, the heart lighter, we will again have the strength to continue our path, not out of strain, but with more mindfulness and serenity. And that is also when we begin to understand that letting go a little doesn't make us lose anything. On the contrary, it helps us suffer less and come closer to peace. There are days when you wake up and don't want to get out of bed, not because you're lazy, and not exactly because you're tired of life, but because your heart is so weary you don't know where to start. Everything is still there. Work still awaits. Responsibilities remain intact. Those around you still need you. But you yourself no longer have the strength to respond. Some mornings, looking up at the ceiling, you ask yourself why you always have to try so hard. Why does life feel heavier the longer you live? Why has the joy of yesteryear suddenly disappeared? You still go to work, still fulfill your role, but each step feels as heavy as carrying stones. Inside, you silently long for a stop button, just for a moment to breathe again, to not have to push yourself anymore. This weariness is not noisy. It doesn't make you cry out or do anything extreme. It quietly erodes you from within, making you irritable, sad, easily impatient with trivial matters. You start to doubt yourself, doubt the path you're on, even doubt choices that once seemed right. Sometimes you're tired because work isn't going as planned, because you try hard but aren't recognized. Sometimes you're tired because of family, because you want to fulfill your duties, but always feel inadequate. Sometimes you're tired because of money, because the worry about the future constantly weighs on the present. Sometimes you're tired because of relationships, because you've been patient for too long, sacrificed too much, but still don't find happiness. And sometimes you're tired simply because you have to live in a society that constantly demands you to be strong, to be successful, to always move forward, never to be weak or to stop. The wisdom of the Dharma reminds us that this weariness is not unfamiliar. The Buddha pointed out that suffering is the first truth of life. Suffering is not just major events like loss, illness, or separation, but also lingering, smoldering feelings like mental fatigue, unnamed tension, constant unease. When we don't understand suffering deeply, we tend to blame ourselves, thinking we are inferior, weak, and less capable than others. But when seen through the light of the Dharma, we realize that suffering is something everyone must go through. It doesn't discriminate between rich or poor, noble or humble, intellectual or manual laborer. The only difference is that some people know when to stop to take care of themselves, while others continue to push themselves until they are utterly exhausted. In the eyes of the world, stopping is often misunderstood as failure. People fear judgment, fear being called lazy, fear being left behind. We are the same. When we think about resting or slowing down, a feeling of guilt and anxiety immediately arises. We fear that if we stop, everything will collapse, work will be lost, opportunities will slip away, others will pass us by. This very fear makes us continue to push ourselves. Even if the body is tired, the mind is drained. The Buddha taught that one who knows when to stop at the right time is one who knows how to protect their body and mind. Protection is not about escaping life, but about keeping the body from becoming exhausted and the mind from collapsing, to have enough strength for the long journey. In human psychology, there is a very deep-seated habit, identifying one's self-worth with endless effort. We believe that only when we work constantly, endure skillfully, and overcome all fatigue, do we deserve recognition. We fear that if we stop, we will become useless. But this very thought is the root cause of much suffering. When we don't allow ourselves to stop, we also don't allow ourselves to be weak, to rest, to recover. We forget that this body has limits, and this mind also needs comfort sometimes. In Buddhist teachings, the middle way is the path that avoids two extremes, neither self-indulgence nor self-mortification. Stopping at the right time is an expression of the middle way in modern life. The channel of responsive Buddhist teachings wants to tell you a very ordinary story about a construction worker in his 40s. He was the breadwinner for his family, waking up at dawn every day, working until late at night. His work was arduous, enduring sun and rain, but he rarely complained. He feared that if he rested, his family would lack money, his children would suffer. One morning, while mixing cement, he suddenly felt his hands tremble, his back ached, and his head swam. He tried to stand firm, but sweat poured, his heart pounded, and his breath came in gasps. For the first time in many years, he took a day off. On the way home, his heart was full of guilt. He feared people would think he was lazy, feared the contractor would be displeased, feared he wouldn't have work tomorrow. That day, he did nothing. He just sat on his porch, brewed a pot of tea, and drank it in small sips. He watched his children play in the yard, listening to their clear laughter, which he hadn't noticed for a long time. He breathed deeply, feeling his body gradually calm down. In that moment, he suddenly realized that it had been a very long time since he had truly been home, truly been with his family, even though his body was present. The next day, when he returned to work, he found he still had strength, but more importantly, he still had his mind. He worked a little slower, but more steadily. He no longer snapped without reason, no longer felt like giving up. Just one day of stopping, he had protected his body and mind to continue the long road ahead. That story is not to encourage us to neglect our responsibilities, but to remind us that letting go of weariness is not letting go of life. In Buddhist teachings, letting go, buong sa, does not mean abandoning everything, but releasing unnecessary burdens from the mind. We still go to work, still care for our families, but no longer carry excessive fear, no longer force ourselves to be perfect. We clearly distinguish between giving up and letting go, buong sui and buong bot. Giving up is abandoning, escaping, abdicating responsibility. Letting go is putting down overwhelming expectations, comparisons that hurt us, worries that haven't happened yet. When we can let go of these things, our minds are lighter, and that lightness helps us work better, live more kindly. In the scriptures, the Buddha repeatedly spoke of observing the body and mind. When the body is tired, know that the body is tired. When the mind is worried, know that the mind is worried. This knowing is without judgment, without blame, simply recognition. When we recognize our weariness, we can care for it. Just as when a child is tired, it needs rest and comfort, not scolding. Our body and mind are the same. The more they are forced, the more they resist with exhaustion and suffering. There's a very simple practice that anyone can do immediately when feeling too tired. That is to allow yourself to stop for a few minutes, just to breathe. No complex posture needed, no special space. Just sit still, back reasonably straight, eyes half closed. Inhale slowly, knowing you are inhaling. Exhale gently, knowing you are exhaling. Each breath is a reminder that you are still alive, still present. When the mind wanders to worries, gently bring it back to the breath. Practicing this for a few minutes, you will find your mind calming down, your body feeling lighter. This is not some profound secret, but a very practical way to protect the body and mind that Buddhist teachings have pointed out for over 2,000 years. Once you know how to stop to breathe, you can stop to reflect. Reflect on what burdens you are carrying on your shoulders. Some burdens are necessary, like responsibilities to family and work. But there are also burdens we create ourselves, like the expectation to be like others, to succeed according to some template. When you see clearly, you can choose to put down those unnecessary burdens. This choice doesn't happen in one day, but is a process. Each time you realize, each time you let go a little, your mind becomes a little lighter. When life has pulled you so far that you no longer feel excited waking up each morning, and your heart feels heavy lying down each night, perhaps you will understand that weariness is not because you do too many things, but because you carry too many things that don't belong to you. There is a weariness that doesn't show with sweat on your brow, but lies silently within, smoldering like a small stone, pressing on your chest every day. You still go to work, still smile and talk, still fulfill your role, but inside, you seem to be depleted. You find yourself constantly trying not to fall behind, trying to be recognized, trying to please others. And the more you try, the more tired you become, the more you feel like you are living someone else's life, not your own. Perhaps right now, as you hear these words on the channel of responsive Buddhist teachings, you are sighing inwardly and thinking, yes, that's me. I don't know why I suffer. I just feel tired. I haven't done anything terribly wrong, nor have I completely failed. But why does my heart feel so heavy? Why does joy seem to fade further away? In Buddhism, such suffering is called mental suffering, ko tam. This suffering doesn't come from lack of food or clothing, but from clinging to things that are not yours, clinging to the opinions of others, clinging to templates that society sets up, and then forcing yourself to fit them perfectly. According to Buddhist teachings, each person is born with their own karma and karmic connections. Nhan duyen, va ngip rieng. Each person has a different path, a different pace, a different lesson. But out of ignorance, out of fear, out of insufficient mindfulness, we often look at the lives of others, then compare, then place their standards upon our own shoulders. We think that our children must be like other people's children. Our family must be equal to or better than our neighbors. And we ourselves must be praised and recognized to live a valuable life. These very thoughts silently bind our minds, causing us to live in tension without realizing it. The Buddha taught that the root causes of suffering lie in greed, hatred, and delusion, tham, san, vasi. In this case, greed is not just for money, but also for praise, for recognition, for surpassing others. Delusion is not clearly seeing what is our responsibility, what is others' responsibility, what is our own path, what are expectations imposed by society. When greed and delusion go hand in hand, people embrace many things that do not belong to them, and the more they embrace, the more they suffer. The human mind is inherently fragile. We grow up with teachings that tell us to try hard, to succeed, to bring honor to our family. These things in themselves are not wrong, but when they become pressure, they turn into burdens. Many people dare not live authentically with their emotions for fear of being criticized as weak. Many people dare not stop to rest for fear of being called incompetent. So we keep going, carrying within us the fear of gossip and criticism. We live more for the eyes of others than for our own peace. There are times when just an accidental remark from an outsider is enough to make us toss and turn all night. A slight comparison from someone is enough to make us doubt our self-worth. We don't realize that we have handed over the power to decide our happiness to others. When they praise us, we are happy. When they criticize us, we are sad. Our minds fluctuate with the words of others, like a fragile leaf in the wind, with no firm ground of its own. In daily life, there are many mothers, fathers, wives, and husbands living this way without being able to name their suffering. They think it's responsibility, duty, sacrifice. But sacrifice without mindfulness easily turns into endurance. And enduring for too long can make the mind sick. There's a very ordinary story about a mother who ran a small grocery store at the edge of the neighborhood. Her store wasn't big, just enough to make ends meet, and she had one child in school. Every day, she would hear neighbors boast about their children excelling in school, winning awards. Each time, an indescribable worry would stir in her heart. She started comparing, started fearing that her child was falling behind. She pushed her child to study more, not because the child liked it, but because she feared what people would say. Whenever someone carelessly criticized her child for not doing as well as others, she would smile it off. But at night, she would lie awake, tossing and turning. She would think endlessly about that remark, imagining all sorts of scrutinizing glances. She didn't realize that she was living out of fear rather than love. Gradually, her body became tired. She lost her appetite, and she couldn't sleep soundly. It wasn't until she fell ill and lay in bed that she had time to reflect. She suddenly realized that for years she had lived for the words of others, for comparisons, for the fear of being judged, forgetting to ask if her own heart was at peace, if her child was happy. During her illness, she heard a Buddhist lecture. In it, there was a saying that the greatest suffering of humans is clinging to things that do not belong to them. She burst into tears. For the first time, she clearly saw her suffering. It wasn't because she was poor, nor because she was struggling, but because she had carried too many expectations of others on her shoulders. She let out a long sigh, as if shedding an invisible burden. The Buddha once taught that holding on too tightly causes pain, Only by gently letting go can the mind breathe. That saying sounds simple, but to understand and live by it requires a great deal of mindfulness. Letting go here doesn't mean abandoning, nor being irresponsible, but returning everything to its rightful place. Returning expectations to those who set them. Returning the path to those who must walk it. Returning to oneself the right to live according to one's own abilities and karmic connections. In the scriptures, the Buddha repeatedly mentioned clinging as the primary cause of suffering. Clinging to the ego, clinging to fame, clinging to superiority or inferiority, clinging to the opinions of the world. He likened these things to a fire. The tighter one holds, the more one is burned. Only by letting go can the fire cease to burn the mind. The wisdom of the Dharma reminds us that the Venerable Masters also taught that one who knows how to turn inward and examine their inner self has already taken a step out of suffering. When we stop and ask ourselves, does this truly belong to me? We begin to create distance from suffering. When we realize that we don't need to carry the whole world on our shoulders, our minds begin to lighten. If right now you see yourself in that story, try a small exercise. It's very simple. No much preparation needed. When a worry or a pressure arises, sit still for a few minutes and silently ask yourself, is this my concern? Or is it someone else's expectation? If it's your concern, do what you can with a calm mind. If it's not, imagine gently putting it down, like setting a heavy object out of your hand. No need to chase it away, no need to dislike it, just put it down. You can also practice mindful breathing. Inhale, knowing you are inhaling. Exhale, knowing you are exhaling. With that breath, silently remind yourself that you allow yourself to let go a little. Each breath is an act of returning an unnecessary burden to life. Doing this for a few minutes each day, you will find your mind gradually calming down. Letting go of things that don't belong to you is a journey, not something done overnight. There will be times when you forget, pick them up again, and feel tired again. But each time you remember and let go, even just a little, you have moved closer to peace and serenity. The Buddha did not teach us to become perfect people, but taught us to become mindful people. When you stop living for the gaze of others, you begin to hear your inner voice more clearly. When you stop comparing, you will see that your life has its own unique value. When you no longer crave recognition, you will find your heart more spacious, lighter. And in that lightness, you will have the energy to live more kindly, to love more, starting with yourself and extending to those around you. If life is making you tired, perhaps it's not because you are weak, but because you have pushed yourself for too long for things that do not belong to you. Allow yourself to let go a little, to slow down, to breathe deeper. In each moment of letting go, you are healing yourself. Just as the Buddha taught, peace is not far away. It begins with a mind that knows when to let go at the right time. There are days when you wake up and everything around you is exactly the same. The same room, the same road, the same job, the same people. But your heart is no longer as before. You feel tired, but don't know how to explain it to anyone. Tired from overthinking, tired from worrying too far ahead, tired from feeling as if life is standing still while you are falling behind. You look around and see others seemingly more stable, lighter, while you always carry a gray cloud in your heart. You ask yourself if fate is being too harsh on you, or if you have done something wrong to deserve this feeling of being stuck. And the more you think, the heavier your heart becomes. Sometimes you don't need advice. You don't need anyone to show you the way. You just need someone to sit beside you and say, "I understand. You are truly tired." In such moments, we often think that if circumstances changed, we would suffer less. If the job were better, if money were more abundant, if others understood us better, if life were less challenging, perhaps our hearts would lighten. But then we forget a very important thing that Buddhism pointed out over 2,000 years ago. Suffering does not only come from external circumstances, but largely from how our minds receive and interpret those circumstances. For the same event, some see it as a dead end, while others see it as a lesson. Not because life is biased towards anyone, but because each person views life from a different angle. According to Buddhist teachings, suffering is a truth that everyone must confront. The Four Noble Truths begin with the truth of suffering. It acknowledges that this life is inherently imperfect, always containing dissatisfaction. But the Buddha did not stop at saying that life is suffering. He pointed out the cause of suffering and the path to end suffering. One of the deep causes of suffering is ignorance, not seeing clearly the nature of things, not seeing clearly that all phenomena are impermanent and can change. And that change is not only in circumstances, but also in one's own perspective. When we believe that there is only one way to see life, we imprison ourselves in a narrow box. When things don't go as we wish, we feel cornered. But when we begin to realize that the same event can be seen in many different ways, we gain more space to breathe. That is not deceiving ourselves that everything is fine, but allowing ourselves the right to see more broadly, more deeply, and more lightly. The human mind often tends to cling to negative emotions when encountering difficulties. A failure occurs, and we are not only sad about that failure, but also dragged down by a series of other thoughts. We think we are incompetent, that the future is bleak, that life is unfair. These thoughts pile up, forming a heavy mass in the mind. We suffer not just from the event, but also from how we retell that story to ourselves again and again. Some people, when facing an adverse event, their minds shrink, seeing only loss. Others also feel sad and hurt, but after a while, they begin to ask what they can learn from it. The difference does not lie in the severity of the circumstances, but in the ability to transform the mind. Those who do not know how to transform their minds are led by circumstances. Those who know how to transform their minds use circumstances as material for growth. In modern life, we are often taught to be strong, to quickly get back up after a fall. But few teach us how to look back at an adverse event with gentleness and mindfulness. We either complain or try to appear fine, while inside the pain remains, not truly understood. Buddhist teachings do not tell us to be happy immediately when we encounter suffering, but teach us to look directly at suffering with a mind that does not resist. When we dare to look, dare to admit that we are sad, that we are tired, then we have the opportunity to look deeper into the nature of the matter, there is a very ordinary story about two people who worked for the same company. They worked in the same department, had the same salary, and faced the same pressures. One day, the company restructured, and both were on the list of layoffs. The news came as a shock. Both were stunned. Both worried about the future. But from that moment, their paths began to diverge. The first person carried resentment in his heart. He felt he was treated unfairly, felt life was too harsh. Every day, he rehashed the story of losing his job with anger. He blamed his boss, the company, circumstances, and even fate. He withdrew, communicated less, and gradually lost faith. Every time he thought about the future, he only saw gray. His sadness was not digested, but accumulated into bitterness. The second person was also sad, also worried, also had sleepless nights. But after the first tears, he began to ask himself what he could do next if he was no longer there. He allowed himself to rest for a short period, something he had always felt guilty about doing before. He looked back at things he had wanted to learn, but hadn't had time for. He enrolled in a short course and tried a different job. Not everything went smoothly, but his mind was no longer stuck in resentment. A year later, the first person still hadn't escaped the feeling of being stuck. The second person gradually became more stable. Not because life favored him more, but because he chose to see that adverse event as an opportunity to change direction. The initial circumstances were the same, but the results were different because their perspectives were different. That story is not meant to say who was right or wrong, but gently shows the power of looking at life from a different angle. In the scriptures, the Buddha taught the mind is the foremost of all phenomena. If the mind is polluted, suffering follows, like the wheel follows the foot of the ox that pulls the cart. If the mind is pure, peace follows, like a shadow that never leaves. This does not mean that simply thinking positively is enough, but that we need mindfulness to recognize how our minds are reacting to circumstances. The Venerable Masters often reminded us that circumstances do not bind people. It is the human mind that binds itself to circumstances. When we see circumstances as an enemy, we fight and get tired. When we see circumstances as a lesson, we learn and grow. This transformation does not happen in an instant, but is a process that requires patience and compassion for oneself. If you are tired, feeling that life is too heavy, try to stop for a moment, not to find answers immediately, but to breathe. You can sit still in a quiet place, place your hands on your chest or stomach, and begin a gentle breath. When inhaling, simply know that you are tired without judgment, without trying to change anything. When exhaling, allow yourself to feel a little lighter. Even if it's just a very small amount, you don't need to be completely free of weariness. Just a little lighter is enough. That breath is the bridge between body and mind. When we breathe mindfully, we return to the present moment, where suffering is no longer magnified as it is in our thoughts. We do not flee from difficulties, nor do we drown in them. We stand in the middle, looking at them with gentler eyes. Each breath like this, we are training ourselves in a different way of seeing, no longer reacting hastily, no longer being swept away by emotions. You can also practice by observing your thoughts. When a negative thought appears, instead of immediately believing it, see it like a cloud drifting across the sky. The cloud may be dark, but the sky is vast. The thought may be heavy, but your mind is not just that thought. When you create that distance, you begin to have freedom. Looking at life from a different angle is not denying pain, but not letting the pain define your entire life. You have the right to be sad, to be tired, to be disappointed. But you also have the right to choose how you tell that story to yourself. You can tell it as a series of misfortunes or as a learning journey. Each way of telling will lead you to a different state of mind. In daily life, you can start with very small things. When you encounter something unsatisfactory, instead of asking why this happened to me, try asking what this is teaching me. When you find yourself comparing yourself to others, turn back to look at your own path. Each person has a different pace, a different lesson, a different karmic connection. Comparison only makes the mind tighter. It doesn't make life broader. The healing message here is not be strong, but be gentler with yourself. When you allow yourself to look at life from a different angle, you are giving yourself the opportunity to breathe, to rest, to slow down in a world that constantly pushes. And in that slowness, you will see that not every closed door is a loss. Some doors close so you can turn around and see another path you never noticed before. If life is making you tired, remember that you don't need to change the whole world right now. Just by changing how you look at a small thing, suffering will decrease a bit. And when suffering decreases, the mind has space to find peace. From that space, wisdom and peace will gradually arise. Just as the Buddha taught, when the mind is transformed, circumstances naturally change, and peace begins with your own mindful perspective today. Perhaps in your life, you have felt disadvantaged at times. You live kindly, harming no one, working diligently, being accommodating in every way, yet the results are not as expected. Sometimes you are misunderstood, misjudged, underestimated. Sometimes you look around and wonder why others try less than you, yet have an easier time while you constantly struggle. In such moments, the pain doesn't just come from circumstances, but also from silent self-blame within. You blame yourself for not being good enough, not fast enough, not skillful enough, not good enough. You forget that you have already come a very long way. Some people out there will never know how much you have tried. They only see the final result and quickly conclude. But the most painful thing is not that others don't understand, but that you yourself begin to doubt yourself. You look back at past efforts and wonder if it all meant anything. You feel tired, not just from the hardship, but from the feeling that you've tried your best, yet still haven't reached what you desire. And in that weariness, you turn to hurt yourself with self-reproach that no one else hears. In Buddhism, suffering is not just what happens externally, but also how we treat ourselves when facing adversity. There is a very quiet kind of suffering, the suffering of self-blame, self-torment, and self-contempt. We think that if we are stricter with ourselves, we will improve. But in reality, strictness without mindfulness only exhausts the mind further. The Buddha taught that every action creates karma, but it's not just about what we do, but also about the intention that arises in our mind at each moment. When the mind is full of self-blame, we are sowing a type of karma that prolongs suffering. According to Buddhist teachings, No wholesome effort is meaningless. Every drop of sweat, every late night, every act of patience, if accompanied by a mind that doesn't give up, is a seed. Some seeds sprout early. Some take a very long time to bear fruit. But a sown seed is not lost. Only humans, due to impatience, comparison, and wanting to see immediate results, think that their efforts were in vain. When tired, the human mind tends to turn the sharp end towards itself. We are quick to forgive circumstances, quick to make excuses for others, but very harsh on ourselves. We forget that we are also human beings, learning how to live, not machines that must always meet standards. When we see others succeed, we look back at ourselves with reproach. We don't see what we have overcome, but only what we haven't achieved. The feeling of not being good enough is a very common wound, but rarely spoken of. It makes people constantly live in a state of excessive effort, not daring to rest, not daring to be satisfied. It whispers that if we stop, we will fall behind. If we don't push ourselves, we will become useless. And so we continue to go, continue to endure, while inside we grow increasingly empty. The Buddha taught that compassion is not only directed outwards, but must first be directed towards oneself. A person who does not know how to love themselves will find it very difficult to love others in a lasting way. Only a mind that knows how to love itself has the strength to love life. Self-love is not indulgence or neglect, but clearly understanding one's limits, acknowledging one's efforts, and not treating oneself with harsh words. There is a very ordinary story about a woman who sold vegetables at the market. Every day, she woke up at 3 a.m. While it was still pitch dark, she quietly prepared her goods, carried her vegetables to the market, and sat there until the sun was high. She did this for many years, raising her children and putting them through school. Her life was not abundant. She always had to calculate every penny. When she saw others doing bigger business, with more spacious homes, sometimes her heart would sink. On some afternoons, when customers were sparse, she would sit alone and think about her children. She saw other people's children excelling in school with bright futures. She would turn to blame herself. She thought that because she was incompetent, her children were disadvantaged. These thoughts made her sadder than the fatigue in her hands. Some evenings, returning home, she would be silent for a long time, not because she was angry with anyone else, but because she was angry with herself. Once, while she had to close early due to rain, she visited a small temple. She sat and listened to a monk speak about karma and merit. The monk said that merit is not only in the results that others see, but in a mind that doesn't give up in the face of adversity. He said that a person who raises their children with sweat and tears, with honesty, with patience, that is already a great blessing. Even if the results are not immediately apparent, those words touched her heart. For the first time, she looked back at her life with different eyes. She no longer saw only deprivation, but a journey of perseverance. She realized that she had done her best in her circumstances. She was not rich or brilliant by societal standards, but she had not given up, had not done anything bad, had not succumbed. And that, in Buddhism, is an effort worthy of respect. The Buddha once taught that each person reaps the fruits of many lifetimes, not just the present one. Some seeds sown today do not sprout immediately, but accumulate silently. When we use short-term results to negate all our efforts, we are looking at life through a very narrow lens. The Buddha did not encourage self-torment, but encouraged diligent effort with a mind at peace. The Venerable Masters often reminded us that practice, tuhu, is not about forcing oneself to be perfect, but about learning to live mindfully in every step. A person who has tried their best but still suffers, what they need is not more blame, but understanding and compassion. When we know when to stop and tell ourselves that we have done our best, our minds begin to find a resting place. If you are listening to this and see yourself in that story, try a very small practice. Every night before sleep, spend a few minutes looking back at your day, not to review mistakes, but to recognize at least one thing you tried, however small. Perhaps you woke up early despite being very tired, or patiently endured harsh words, or completed a task even if no one recognized it. Just one thing. When you realize it, silently tell yourself, I tried my best. You can also place your hand on your chest and breathe slowly. When inhaling, silently remind yourself that you have done your best within your capacity. When exhaling, allow yourself to let go of self-blame. No need to believe it immediately, just repeat it gently. These words are like cool water, nourishing a land that has been parched for too long. In daily life, when you find yourself comparing and putting yourself down, remember that everyone has a different journey. Some go fast, some go slow, some see results early, some have to wait a long time. But going slow doesn't mean going wrong. As long as you continue with honesty and sincere effort, that path still has value. The healing message of this part is very simple. If you have tried a lot already, please don't hurt yourself further with self-blame. Life out there is harsh enough. Your mind doesn't need to become another courtroom. Let your mind be a refuge, a place you can return to when tired. When you know how to love yourself, you don't become weak, but more resilient. Self-love doesn't stop you. It helps you continue with a healthier heart. When you stop considering your efforts as insufficient, you will have the energy to keep trying without getting burnt out. And in that continuation, you are sowing more wholesome seeds for the future. Even if you don't see them immediately, if life is making you tired, remember that you don't need to prove your worth through suffering. You have tried in your own way, in your own circumstances. That alone, in the light of Buddhist teachings, is something very precious. As you listen to these words, perhaps your heart carries a very real suffering. Perhaps you have lived very kindly, worked your hardest, harmed no one, but in return, faced disadvantages, misunderstandings, suspicious glances, and the feeling that life has treated you unfairly. There are days when you ask yourself why you have tried so hard, yet everything still falls apart. There are nights when you lie in silence, your heart heavy, unable to cry, unable to sleep soundly. You don't complain to anyone, because even if you did, no one would fully understand. You just quietly endure, push yourself, resisting the reality unfolding before your eyes. And in those very moments, the suffering seems not only to not diminish, but to grow larger, deeper, like a continuous wave crashing into your mind, not allowing you to rest. Buddhist teachings do not deny this suffering. On the contrary, the Buddha began his path to enlightenment by looking directly at suffering. He did not say that life is rosy. He stated very clearly that life is suffering. Birth is suffering. Old age is suffering. Sickness is suffering. Death is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. Having to part from loved ones is suffering. Having to meet those you dislike is suffering. But more importantly is how we confront suffering in Buddhism. Suffering is not a punishment, nor is it an unjustified penalty. Suffering is the result of karmic causes and conditions, of karmic forces, of clinging and ignorance accumulated over many lifetimes. Suffering comes not to defeat us, but to awaken us. The more we resist, the more we resent, the more we ask, why me? The more that suffering not only exists in external circumstances, but doubles in the mind. One part is the pain of the event. The other part is the pain created by the mind's resistance. The human mind is used to trying to avoid suffering. When something unpleasant happens, the first reaction is non-acceptance. We blame others, blame life, blame fate. We compare ourselves to others, see them as lighter, luckier, and then ask why we have to suffer. That mind is like a hand tightly gripping a burning coal, hoping others will get burned. In reality, the one who gets hurt first is ourselves. Resentment makes the mind stiff, like a closed door, not allowing the light of understanding to enter. When the mind is closed, suffering is no longer a phenomenon that comes and goes, but becomes a permanent state. We lose our appetite, can't sleep soundly, feel tired doing anything. Because there's always a silent war within between reality and our desires. In Buddhist teachings, resisting suffering is a very subtle form of clinging. We cling to the idea that life must go our way, cling to the idea that we don't deserve this. We cling to the idea that suffering is an enemy to be destroyed. But the more we resist, the deeper we are pulled into the whirlpool of anger and helplessness. Suffering is essentially just a wave. When we stand still, the wave comes and goes. But when we thrash about, it carries us further away. Acceptance in Buddhism is not giving up, not negatively enduring. Acceptance is looking directly, clearly recognizing that suffering is present and allowing it to exist without adding resentment or self-blame. When the mind no longer resists, suffering is still there, but it no longer has the power to torment us as before. There is a very relatable, everyday story that many of us might see ourselves in. A middle-aged man spent his whole life hoping to make an honest living to provide for his family. He wasn't ambitious for great wealth. He just wanted a comfortable life where his children could get a good education. When an opportunity arose through an acquaintance, he trusted it and invested all his savings accumulated over many years. He even borrowed more, thinking that in a few years he could pay everything off and his life would be stable. But then everything collapsed in a short time. The person he trusted disappeared. His money was gone, and debts piled up. In the first few days after the incident, his mind felt like it had fallen into an abyss. He resented the person who had cheated him, resented himself for being too trusting, resented life for being unfair. Every morning, he woke up feeling heavy, as if a stone was pressing on his chest. He dared not look at his wife and children, for his heart was filled with guilt and shame. At night, he couldn't sleep his mind racing with hundreds of why questions. The more he thought, the more he suffered. The more he suffered, the more he blamed. This cycle gradually debilitated him. His health declined, and his mind was weary. One day, by chance, he followed an acquaintance to a temple. Initially, he wasn't seeking anything profound. He just hoped for a quiet place to sit and lighten his heart. Listening to a monk speak about karma and cause and effect, he began to pay more attention. The monk did not blame him, nor did he say that he deserved what happened. The monk gently reminded him that everything that happens has its causes and conditions, and what is important is not what has passed, but how we live in the present. If we keep resenting, the old karma is not yet repaid, and new karma is already created. If we know how to reflect on ourselves, recognize our lack of understanding, our subjectivity, our ambition, however small, then suffering can become a lesson that awakens us. From then on, he began to change his perspective. He no longer asked why he was suffering, but asked what he could learn from this suffering. He accepted the reality that the money was lost and the debt remained, but he no longer let his mind scream as before. Every day he worked to repay the debt little by little, with mindfulness. Sometimes he was tired, sometimes sad, but he no longer wallowed in resentment. The suffering was still there, but it no longer completely consumed his mind. In the quiet moments at the temple, he realized that his previous resistance had made him suffer twice as much. When he let go of that resistance, the suffering didn't immediately disappear, but it became lighter, softer, enough for him to carry it without collapsing. In the scriptures, the Buddha once taught that all feelings are impermanent. Suffering comes and goes, like clouds drifting across the sky. But if we mistakenly believe that the clouds are the sky, we will think that the sky is always gloomy. Mindfulness helps us distinguish between clouds and sky, distinguish between suffering and the clear, bright nature of the mind within. With mindfulness, we clearly see that suffering is not us, not our essential nature. It is merely a state arising due to sufficient conditions, and when those conditions change, it will dissolve. The patriarchs also reminded us that a practitioner does not seek to end suffering, but seeks to understand suffering. To understand so as not to be swayed by suffering. To understand so as not to create more suffering for oneself and for others. When suffering comes, if we know how to stop, breathe deeply, and recognize that suffering is present, then at that very moment, we are no longer complete victims. We become observers, learners, and this shift in role is already a profound transformation. You can practice this in your daily life. You don't need to do anything extraordinary. When something unpleasant happens, instead of immediately reacting with blame or negative thoughts, give yourself a short pause. Inhale very slowly. Exhale very deeply. Simply knowing that there is discomfort, sadness, or anger within. No need to push it away. No need to analyze, right or wrong at that moment. Just acknowledge it. You can silently tell yourself, I know I am suffering, and I allow this feeling to be here for a moment. Just doing that, the mind will begin to soften. Afterwards, when the mind is calmer, you can look at the event through the light of cause and effect, not to blame yourself, but to understand. Understand that every decision has its conditions. Every mistake is the result of ignorance in a particular moment. When you understand, you will be less resentful. When you are less resentful, the energy of suffering will no longer be nourished. The healing message that Buddhism conveys is not grit your teeth and endure, nor is it try to forget the pain. The message is very gentle. When suffering comes, do not resist. Let suffering pass through you, like a guest. Listen to what suffering wants to tell you. Sometimes it reminds us to slow down. Sometimes it reminds us to let go of excessive desires. Sometimes it reminds us to turn inward and care for our minds more. When we know how to apply acceptance with mindfulness in life, we will see that suffering is no longer an enemy. It becomes a silent teacher, teaching us to grow from within. And then, one day, looking back, you might no longer clearly remember how great a specific pain once was. You will only remember that thanks to those days, your mind became deeper, softer, and more understanding of life. You will still walk through life with your daily responsibilities, but inside, there will be no more screaming. That is not because life has become free of suffering, but because you have learned how to no longer resist suffering. At that time, peace does not come from everything being perfect, but from a mind that knows how to let go, how to accept, and how to believe that all suffering will eventually pass if we do not bind ourselves to it. There are days when you wake up with a heavy heart, unclear why, not because of extreme poverty, nor exactly from a lack of food and clothing, but from a prolonged, smoldering feeling that makes one weary from within. You look next to you, look at social media, look at the stories of people around you, and then, spontaneously, feel your heart sink. People your age already have homes and cars. People who once studied in the same class, started from the same point, are now successful and respected. And what about you? Still struggling with a familiar job, a salary just enough to live on, with dreams that always seem far off in the distance. Sometimes you live very kindly, harming no one, always trying your best. Yet life still presents you with rough and winding turns. You have been misunderstood, underestimated, considered a slow learner. And then, in such moments, you begin to compare. Comparing yourself to others, comparing your life to theirs, comparing your present to their success. The more you compare, the more tired your heart becomes. The more you look, the heavier your heart feels. You don't say it aloud, but deep down, there is a very soft sigh. Am I too late? Am I a failure? Comparison silently infiltrates the human mind very early. As children, we were taught to look at others to strive. Growing up, society further encourages comparison as a measure of value. Who is smarter? Who has more money? Who succeeds earlier? Who has higher status? And gradually, we forget a very important thing, that each human being is a separate life with different conditions, different karmic connections, different paths. In Buddhist teachings, comparison originates from ego clinging, from seeing one's own ego as the center, and then placing it next to the ego of others. When that ego feels inferior, it gives rise to insecurity, sadness, and resentment. When that ego feels superior, it gives rise to arrogance and contempt. Whether superior or inferior, comparison always makes the mind restless. The Buddha taught that suffering comes not only from poverty or illness, but also from subtle psychological states, including envy, jealousy, and comparison. Comparison itself is a form of suffering because it prevents us from finding peace in the present, from being content with what we have. If we look deeply into human psychology, we will see that comparison often appears most strongly when we are tired and insecure, when our hearts are full. When we feel stable, we rarely notice if others are better or worse than us. But when we lack self-confidence, when the road ahead is uncertain, we begin to seek external validation to define ourselves. We see the success of others as a mirror reflecting our own incompleteness. We forget that what we see is only the surface. We see homes, cars, status. But we don't see the sleepless nights, the pressures, the worries that the other person is carrying. We compare our inner self with the outer self of others. And naturally, the result is always a disadvantage for ourselves. Comparison thus becomes an unbalanced scale, where the heavy side is always our sadness. There was a man named Min. He was 35 years old. Min was born into an ordinary family in the countryside. His parents were farmers who spent their lives tied to the fields. Min was not very good at school. After graduating, he got a factory job in the industrial park. His days passed steadily. In the morning, he went to work. In the evening, he returned to his rented room. At the end of the month, he received his salary and sent a portion back to his parents in the countryside. Min's peers. Some started companies, some became managers, some bought houses in the city. Every time there was a class reunion, Min would often sit quietly, smiling. But his heart felt bitter. He asked himself what he had done wrong, where he had fallen behind. Some evenings, Min would lie looking at the ceiling, his head full of unanswered questions. He felt like someone who had arrived late to a big party, when everyone else was already seated, and he was lost outside the door. One day, by chance, Min followed a friend to listen to a Dharma talk at a temple. Initially, he just went out of curiosity, not expecting anything. But during that talk, the monk said a very simple sentence that deeply touched his heart. The monk said that in this life, no one is ever late. There are only those who haven't arrived at their right time. He spoke of flowers. Some bloom in spring, some wait until midsummer. Some only open their petals when autumn arrives. No one blames autumn flowers for not blooming in spring. Each type of flower has its own time to spread its fragrance. Humans are the same. Each person has their own karmic connections, their own karma, their own ripe moment. Comparing oneself to others is like forcing a flower to bloom out of season. Even if it succeeds, the flower won't be beautiful and will usually wither. Hearing that, Min felt his heart settle. He suddenly realized that all this time he had been tormenting himself just because of a standard that didn't belong to him. He forgot the things he already had: a stable job, good health, his parents still alive, his honesty still intact. He forgot that he himself had overcome many difficulties to reach the present. Just by looking at others, he had denied his own path. From that day on, Min did not immediately become successful. No miracle happened. But he stopped looking down on himself. He worked with a lighter mindset. He diligently learned and improved little by little, not to chase after anyone, but not to let himself down. And wonderfully, when he stopped comparing, he felt less tired. In the scriptures, the Buddha repeatedly referred to the concept of karmic causes and conditions, Nhan Duyen. Everything in the world arises from the convergence of many conditions. Some people succeed early because their conditions ripen early. Some arrive late because they still have to go through other lessons. There is no absolute right or wrong, fast or slow. There is only suitability or unsuitability. The Buddha also taught that the comparing mind arises from craving, tam-I, and ignorance, vo-min. Craving is wanting to be better than or equal to others. Ignorance is not clearly seeing the impermanent and distinct nature of life. When we understand this, we will blame ourselves less and resent life less. We understand that every step we take has its reason. If you are tired from comparison, try a very small practice. Every night before sleep, sit still for a few minutes and ask yourself 3 questions. What did I achieve today, however small? What in my life right now do I have that I once wished for? And what am I grateful for today? By answering these questions, you are drawing your mind back to the present, to what truly belongs to you. Comparison often pulls us out of the present, throwing us into an endless race. Practicing gratitude and self-reflection helps us plant our feet on the ground, standing firm on our own path. You can also practice looking at others with different eyes. Instead of asking why they are better than you, try asking what they have gone through to achieve that, not out of envy, but to understand that no success comes without its price. When you understand, your heart will soften. You will stop blaming yourself, stop resenting. You will see that you and others are all learning life's unique lessons. Letting go of comparison does not mean abandoning dreams or living carelessly. Letting go here means releasing the mind's tendency to measure, releasing the habit of using other people's lives as a yardstick for your own worth. When you can let go of this, you will feel light. Light enough to keep going. Light enough to live in accordance with your abilities and circumstances. Light enough to be patient with yourself. The Buddha did not teach us to become someone else, but taught us to clearly see who we are, where we stand, and to continue with mindfulness. If today you feel you are late, please remember that life is not a single train journey. Everyone has their own train. Some get on early, some get on late, some have to change stations a few times. No one is left behind unless they themselves believe they have been left behind. When you stop comparing, you stop excluding yourself from life. You return to your own rhythm. It's okay to be slow, as long as there is peace. As you listen to these words, perhaps your heart carries a very real weariness. Tired from trying too long without seeing a way out. Tired from living kindly, but often being the one who suffers disadvantage. Tired because there are times when you do nothing wrong, yet are misunderstood, compared, and judged with the cold eyes of others. Sometimes you ask yourself why you have to endure so much suffering, while some people seem to walk through life so lightly. Sometimes you have thought about running away, giving up, pretending not to care anymore, or hoping that if you turn your back on the pain, it will disappear on its own. But the more you run, the more you find suffering clinging to you like an inseparable shadow. And then, in your weakest moment, you might have blamed yourself, thinking, perhaps this is my destiny. Perhaps I was born to suffer. If you are in that state, please allow yourself to pause for a moment, not to escape suffering, but to look directly at it with a gentler gaze. In Buddhist teachings, suffering is not something alien or abnormal. The Buddha began his path to enlightenment by pointing directly to the first truth of life: suffering. Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. Having to part from loved ones is suffering. Having to meet those you dislike is suffering. Suffering is not a punishment reserved for someone unlucky, but the common nature of human existence when living in ignorance and clinging. When understood this way, we realize that encountering suffering does not mean we are inferior, much less a sign that life has abandoned us. Suffering is simply part of the human journey. The issue is not whether we suffer, but how we confront suffering. If we flee, suffering transforms into fear. If we resent, suffering transforms into hatred. But if we accept and look directly, suffering can become a silent teacher, teaching us lessons that comfort could never teach. The human mind often tends to seek comfort and avoid pain. This is very natural. When we fail, we want to forget. When criticized, we want to deny. When hurt, we want to close our hearts. But the more we avoid, the more tense our minds become. It's like trying to push a ball underwater. We have to use a lot of strength, and if we loosen our grip even a little, the ball will spring up even stronger. Suppressed suffering is the same. It doesn't disappear, but just waits for a moment to erupt into fatigue, depression, irritability, or an unnameable emptiness. Many people think that accepting suffering is weakness, resignation, surrendering to fate. But in Buddhist teachings, acceptance is not abandonment, but clear seeing. When we dare to clearly see our suffering, we are no longer unconsciously controlled by it. We begin to have space to breathe, to understand, and to move forward. There's a very ordinary saying, yet very close to the spirit of Buddhist teachings. To find ease, one must have experienced hardship. To be stable, one must have experienced swaying. No one stands firm in life who has never trembled. No one smiles calmly who has never cried silently. The difference is not who encounters less suffering, but who dares to walk through suffering with mindfulness. Walking through suffering does not mean gritting your teeth and enduring, much less tormenting yourself. Walking through suffering is staying with it, observing it, listening to the message it carries, and gradually transforming it with understanding and mindfulness. There is a very ordinary story about a young man, and perhaps you will see some reflection of yourself in it. He was born into an ordinary family with limited means. Throughout his high school years, he was taught that the only way to change his life was to pass the university entrance exam. He believed this and placed all his hopes on that important exam. But on the day the results were announced, his name was not on the list of successful candidates. That failure was not just an academic setback, but a profound emotional shock. He heard whispers, comparisons, and pitying glances. Some people frankly said he had no future. Some advised him to accept his fate and take temporary jobs to get by. In the first few months, he lived in shame and self-doubt. He wanted to hide, dared not meet old friends, dared not face his relatives. His suffering at that time came not only from circumstances, but also from his own harsh self-judgment. After a period of being stuck, he decided to learn a trade. It wasn't his dream choice, but it was the only choice. In those first days of learning, he did the smallest tasks: cleaning, assisting, learning from the very basics. Sometimes he felt like he was moving backward compared to others. While his peers flaunted their degrees and office jobs, he was covered in grease and oil, with scraped hands and feet. Some evenings, returning home, he would sit alone and wonder why his life had taken this turn. His suffering didn't diminish. Sometimes it even felt heavier. But something else began to arise within him: focus. When working, he poured his whole mind into each task. When learning, he listened to every instruction. Gradually, he realized that when his mind was fully present with what he was doing, shame and comparison subsided. The suffering was still there, but it no longer consumed him as before. Many years passed, and his craftsmanship became increasingly solid. He was no longer someone who did odd jobs, but became someone who could confidently take on difficult projects himself. Others began to seek him out because they trusted him. Some people who used to look down on him now had to ask for his help. But more importantly, a different kind of inner strength had grown within him. He understood that if he had only fled from suffering that day, only blamed fate, he might have missed this path. Suffering did not kill him. Suffering forged him. And it was by going through suffering that he found his true worth. In the scriptures, the Buddha repeatedly spoke of wisdom arising from suffering. It is no accident that experienced people often have a deeper gaze. Suffering is where impermanence is most clearly revealed. When we are comfortable, we easily imagine everything is permanent. When we are in pain, we clearly see that nothing stays still, not even pain. The Buddha taught that all phenomena are impermanent. All feelings arise and cease. When we observe in this way, we no longer identify ourselves with suffering. We see suffering as a state that is occurring, not as who we are. We are sad, but we are not sadness itself. We are failing, but we are not a failure. Recognizing that is the first step to freedom. The patriarchs also often reminded us that practice, tu, is not about escaping life, but about living amidst life with a mind that is not submerged by it. If we only want to practice when everything is calm, then that practice is very fragile. It is precisely in adversity that mindfulness has the power to grow. Just as the lotus needs mud to bloom, the awakened mind also needs suffering to mature. Not everyone has to suffer the same way, but everyone has the opportunity to learn from suffering if they know how to turn inward and reflect on themselves. To go through suffering with mindfulness, you don't need to do anything extraordinary. You can start with very small practices. When an unpleasant feeling arises, instead of hastily pushing it away, try to pause and name it in your heart. You can silently say that you are sad, you are worried, you are disappointed. Just name it, without judgment, without analysis. Then bring your attention to your breath. Inhaling, you know you are inhaling. Exhaling, you know you are exhaling. The breath at this moment is like an anchor keeping you in the present. It prevents your mind from drifting with negative thoughts. You can place your hand on your chest and feel your heartbeat, reminding yourself that you are still alive, still breathing, and still have the opportunity to continue. Another very simple exercise is to write down what you are enduring, not to complain, but to see clearly. When suffering remains vague in the mind, it is very heavy. When brought into the light of words, it begins to take shape and limits. You can write why you are sad today, why you are afraid, why you are hurt. After writing, read it back with the attitude of a friend, not a judge. You can ask yourself, if a loved one were in this situation, what would I say to them? Most likely, you will realize that you deserve the compassion that you have long only reserved for others. If your life still feels very heavy right now, please don't rush to conclude that everything will always be this way. In Buddhist teachings, nothing is fixed, not even suffering. The only thing you need to do is not to run away quickly to escape, but to go deeply to understand. When you understand, letting go will happen naturally, without force. And when you can let go, you will realize that the very paths of greatest suffering have silently led you to a steadfastness you never had before. There are times when you feel you have endured a lot, endured to keep the peace, endured not to make anyone sad, endured to be seen as understanding. But the more you endure, the heavier your heart becomes. You feel disrespected, dismissed, unfairly treated. Sometimes it's just an accidental remark, a disrespectful glance, a comparison that seems like a joke, but hurts you for a long time. You don't cry aloud, don't react violently, but inside, your heart churns. You ask yourself why you live kindly, but are still not understood. Why are you always the one who has to yield, to bear, to back down? And then this weariness accumulates day by day, making you gradually close off, easily irritable, easily hurt, easily feeling lonely, even when among your closest loved ones. If you are in that state, perhaps it is not because you are weak, but because you are carrying something very heavy on your shoulders. The ego. In Buddhist teachings, the ego is not something unfamiliar. The Buddha called it self-clinging, nga chap, an attachment to the idea of a separate, important self that needs to be protected and honored. When we cling to the ego, we always feel we must be right, must be superior, must be recognized. We fear being looked down upon, fear losing out, fear losing face. It is this fear that prevents our minds from ever truly being at peace. In the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha pointed out that the cause of suffering lies not in external circumstances, but in craving, tam I, and clinging, chap thu. Clinging to the ego is one of the deepest forms of clinging. We don't just cling to money, fame, relationships, but also to our self-image. We want others to see us in the way we desire. When that doesn't happen, suffering arises immediately. The human mind is very subtle, but also very fragile. The ego does not always manifest as obvious arrogance or rivalry. Often it hides in the form of wounded pride, self-pity, or the feeling of not being appreciated. Some people say they don't need to be better than anyone else, but feel deeply hurt when criticized. Some say they don't care about winning or losing, but cannot bear the feeling of being considered inferior. The ego is like a vulnerable child, always needing to be stroked and protected. When someone accidentally touches it, it immediately reacts. That reaction can be silence, sulking, or erupting into an argument. And after each such incident, the atmosphere around becomes heavy. Relationships crack, and we ourselves feel more tired than before. There's a great paradox. The more we try to protect the ego, the more we suffer. It's like tightly gripping a sharp object in your hand. The tighter you squeeze, the more it hurts. We think that if we don't give in, don't back down, we will be respected. But in reality, tension and rigidity make others feel distant. The ego erects invisible barriers that make it difficult for us to reach true peace and harmony. Many people spend their whole lives seeking peace, but don't realize that their own ego is blocking the door to it. There's a very familiar story that could happen in any family. A small family lived together for many years, with love and sacrifice, but also not without friction. One day, simply because of a remark during dinner, someone felt offended. Perhaps the speaker had no ill intention, but the listener felt disrespected. Their ego was touched and immediately reacted. Words back and forth began. No one wanted to admit fault. No one wanted to back down first. Each person had their own reasoning, felt they were right, and felt wronged. The argument didn't stop at one remark, but dragged in old issues, resentments that had accumulated for a long time. Finally, the whole family fell into a cold silence, not looking at each other, not talking. The atmosphere in the house was so heavy that just walking felt difficult. In the days that followed, each person suffered in their own way. Some were angry, some were sad, some felt wounded. Everyone thought that if they apologized, they would lose face, they would be seen as wrong. But then one person in the family, after many sleepless nights, chose to do something very simple, yet very difficult. That person took the initiative to apologize, not because they thought they were entirely wrong, but because they realized that if they kept holding on to their ego, the whole family would continue to suffer. When the apology was spoken, the atmosphere in the house changed very quickly, not because all problems were immediately resolved, but because the ego had been put down. The other person also softened. The story gradually resumed in a gentler tone. There was no longer a winner or a loser, only a feeling of relief from no longer carrying a heavy burden in their heart. In that moment, peace did not come from proving who was right or wrong, but from one person daring to let go of their ego. Letting go did not diminish that person. On the contrary, it made the space around them feel more expansive. When the ego subsides, the human heart also softens. We begin to hear each other's pain instead of just our own voice. In the scriptures, the Buddha taught that no fixed self, ngaya, exists independently. Everything comes into being through the convergence of many conditions. This body is made up of many elements. This mind also arises from many conditions. When we cling tightly to the idea of a separate self, we are clinging to an illusion. The Venerable Masters often reminded us that if we can let go of a part of self-clinging, we attain a part of peace and serenity. The more we let go, the lighter we become. A practitioner is not someone who no longer has emotions, but someone who does not let emotions control them. When criticized, they still feel sad, but do not let sadness turn into hatred. When hurt, they still feel pain, but do not let the pain become a separating wall. Letting go of the ego does not mean letting others walk all over you or neglecting yourself. Letting go is not equating your worth with external praise or criticism. Letting go is understanding that you don't need to be better than others to be valuable. Letting go is daring to admit fault when necessary, but also daring to remain silent when an argument brings no benefit. When we are no longer overly concerned with protecting our self-image, we gain more energy to nurture inner peace. To practice letting go of the ego in daily life, you can start with very small things. When a conflicting opinion arises, try to pause for a beat before reacting. Ask yourself if this is truly worth arguing about. Do I want to protect the truth, or do I just want to protect my ego? When someone says something that bothers you, try to observe the feeling in your body. Is your chest tight? Is your breathing shallow? These signs indicate that the ego is being touched. Just recognizing this, you have created a distance between yourself and the automatic reaction. Another very helpful practice is to genuinely apologize and express gratitude. Apologizing doesn't diminish you. It strengthens relationships. Saying thank you doesn't make you weak. It softens your heart. You can also practice listening without quickly refuting. Listening is not agreeing, but giving the other person a chance to fully express themselves. When others feel heard, their ego also softens, and the conversation becomes much lighter. My dear friend, peace does not lie in how many arguments you win, but in how much ego you can let go of. When the ego that wants to surpass others is put down, you no longer have to compare yourself to anyone. When the ego that can't bear to lose is appeased, you no longer have to strain to prove yourself. When the ego that fears being looked down upon is seen clearly, you no longer have to live defensively. At that moment, your mind is lighter, your heart is more expansive, and life naturally softens. If today you are tired from tense relationships, from prolonged misunderstandings, from the feeling that you always have to push yourself to maintain your position, try once to put the ego down. Not to lose, but to rest. Not to lose, but to preserve your own peace. Perhaps others won't change immediately, but you will feel a very clear change in your heart. And sometimes, just one person willing to let go is enough to soften the entire space around, healing cracks that seemed impossible to mend. There are stages in life when weariness comes not only from mental pressure, but also from a sick body. Perhaps you have experienced that feeling when your body no longer obeys you, when a prolonged illness forces all plans to stop, when declining health makes you dependent and weaker in your own eyes. Sometimes you might have thought that you lived kindly, harming no one, yet illness still came. Sometimes you look around and wonder why others are healthy while you have to suffer pain. In such moments, it is very easy for the heart to feel resentment. Resentment at an unfair sky, blaming others for not understanding, blaming cruel fate. The suffering of the body combined with the suffering of the mind makes you feel as if you are carrying two heavy layers piled on top of each other. If you are in that situation, please know that this feeling is very human, very real, and you are not alone in that suffering. In Buddhist teachings, illness and suffering are not seen as anything abnormal. The Buddha once taught that this body is inherently a gathering place of impermanence. What is born will perish. What is strong will weaken. What is healthy will become ill. Illness is not a punishment, nor is it a sign that you have little merit. Illness is one of the fruits of karma. and karma here is not just the big actions in this life, but also the very long flow of body, speech, and mind from many lifetimes. When karma ripens, the Buddha taught to experience it with mindfulness. Experiencing is not enduring with resentment, but accepting with understanding. When we understand that everything that happens has its causes and conditions, our mind resists less, resents less. And that very reduction in resistance makes suffering much lighter. The human mind, when facing illness, is often very complex. Initially, there's fear of pain, fear of death, fear of losing familiar things. Then comes anger at one's body, at circumstances, at healthy people around, and then sadness, self-pity, the feeling of becoming a burden to the family. These emotions arise very naturally, and if not acknowledged, they will silently make the illness worse. Not because bad emotions cause illness, but because an agitated mind makes it difficult for the body to recover. When the mind is constantly tense, worried, resentful, even each breath becomes heavy. Conversely, when the mind knows how to accept, how to find peace in the present, even if the body still hurts, it is not further tormented by negative thoughts. There is one thing that few people notice. When illness comes, our ego is also greatly challenged. When healthy, we are used to doing everything ourselves, used to controlling our lives. When ill, we are forced to rely on others, to slow down, to acknowledge our limits. This makes the ego very uncomfortable. We suffer not only from the illness, but also from the feeling of helplessness. In Buddhist teachings, this is precisely an opportunity for us to learn about non-self, Vong-nga, not through theory, but through very real experience. When the body is weak, we clearly see that this body is not I. It is not entirely under our control. When we understand that, we begin to cling less, demand less, and the mind gradually softens. There is a story about an elderly aunt that many in the neighborhood still speak of with respect. She was once a strong woman, working hard all her life, caring meticulously for her children and grandchildren. When she grew old, she fell seriously ill. In the early days, she too suffered pain and weariness, like everyone else. But what caught everyone's attention was her attitude. She did not complain about her fate or circumstances. She did not blame the heavens or others. Whenever she felt pain, she would recite the Buddha's name with her breath. Whenever someone came to visit, she would try to smile and speak kind words. Sometimes her children and grandchildren would shed tears seeing her in so much pain. She would gently comfort them, saying, "Illness is a matter of the body. Don't let your mind get sick with it." Gradually, the whole family realized that although her illness did not improve as quickly as hoped, the atmosphere in the house was very different. There was no longer the tension and panic of the beginning. Everyone cared for her with a calmer mind. She also began to reflect on her life, correcting the smallest things in her words and thoughts. She limited harsh words and did not revisit sad old stories. She practiced gratitude for very small things. Grateful for a meal, grateful for someone giving her medicine, grateful for another day, to open her eyes and see her children and grandchildren. Someone asked her why she could be so serene. She just smiled and said that when karma comes, complaining won't lessen the pain. It's better to accept it to lighten the heart. That story is not to say that everyone who is ill must smile or appear strong. Each person has a different capacity for endurance. But the story shows that when the mind does not resist reality, when we do not make ourselves suffer more with resentment, then even in illness, there can be moments of very real peace. She did not overcome the illness, but she did not let the illness overcome her mind. And that became a great source of comfort for the whole family. In the scriptures, the Buddha once taught that a wise person, when experiencing the fruit of suffering, does not complain, because they know that all phenomena arise from causes and conditions. The Venerable Masters also often reminded us that illness is an opportunity to cultivate patience and diligence. Patience, Nhan Nyuk, is not enduring with bitterness, but enduring with understanding. Diligence, Tin Tan, is not trying to do more, but maintaining mindfulness consistently in every moment. When in pain, know that you are in pain. When tired, know that you are tired. Do not add questions like, "Why am I suffering like this?" It is these very questions that further confuse the mind. The Buddha taught about karma not for people to be afraid, but for people to understand and transform it. When karma ripens, we cannot escape it, but we can choose how to receive it. Receiving it with resentment makes the karma heavier. Receiving it with mindfulness lightens the karma. Repaying karma is not just enduring the retribution, but also cultivating body, speech, and mind, even while enduring the retribution. When the body is ill, we keep the body from creating more karma through unwholesome actions. When the mind is restless, we keep the mind from nurturing hatred. When in suffering, we keep our speech from saying words that hurt others. Each time we maintain this, old karma is repaid, and no new karma is created. There are very small exercises that you can practice immediately, whether you are healthy or ill. When you feel discomfort in your body, try bringing your attention to your breath. No need to force cho or deep breaths. Just know that you are breathing. Breath in, breath out, like a quiet friend by your side. You can silently recite the Buddha's name with your breath, so your mind has a place to rest. When pain appears, instead of tensing up, try to relax each part of your body, accepting that feeling like a wave passing through. The sensation comes and will go, whether quickly or slowly. It does not stay in one place. Another practice is to reflect on gratitude. Even when ill, there are still things that have not been lost. You can still hear the voices of loved ones, still feel warmth, still have moments without pain. When the mind turns towards what remains, instead of only looking at what has been lost, the mind naturally calms down. This calming doesn't make the illness disappear immediately, but it makes each day pass with less heaviness. In daily life, this spirit is not only applied to severe illness. Sometimes suffering comes from smaller things, like a criticism, a disappointment, a plan that didn't work out. Each time, you can remind yourself that this too is a form of karma ripening. You can repay it with frustration, or repay it with mindfulness. Each time you choose mindfulness, you are sowing a new seed for the future. That seed may not sprout immediately, but it silently makes the path ahead lighter. If right now you are in a difficult period of health or mind, please allow yourself to slow down. No need to appear strong in front of anyone. No need to force yourself to be optimistic. Just be authentic with what is happening and face it with a mind free of resentment. When you can do that, even for a brief moment, you will feel a very real sense of relief. And from these small moments, peace will gradually be nurtured, enough for you to continue your path with more serenity, even if suffering is still present. There are times when you look back at your life and feel very tired. Tired not just because of what is happening, but because of the feeling that suffering seems to repeat itself. You once tried to live well, once were patient, once harmed no one. Yet adverse events still came, sometimes loss, sometimes illness, sometimes relationship breakdowns, sometimes unstable work. You hear many people talk about karma, and a vague fear begins to arise in your heart. Fear that your karma is heavy, fear that what you are enduring is due to some bad past you cannot remember. Fear that no matter how hard you try, fate has already been decided. This very fear burdens your heart further. You suffer not only from circumstances, but also from the thought that you cannot escape. If you are in that state, allow yourself to listen very slowly to a very important thing in Buddhist teachings. Karma is not to be feared. The most fearful thing is clinging. Chap. In the teachings of the Buddha, karma is intentional action created through body, speech, and mind. Karma is not a fixed sentence, nor is it an unchangeable destiny. Karma is like a flowing river, sometimes strong, sometimes weak. It can be redirected if there is mindfulness. What causes people to suffer for a long time is not because karma comes, but because when karma comes, the mind clings tightly to it. We cling to the story, why am I suffering like this? We cling to the feeling of injustice. We cling to painful memories. We cling to the image of a life that should have been different. This very clinging prolongs suffering, even magnifying it far beyond the actual circumstances. According to Buddhist teachings, all fruits of suffering have a lifespan. No karma exists permanently. If not further nourished, karma will come and go, like a rainstorm. But if during the rain, we just stand outside and refuse to seek shelter, and even resent the rain and wind, we will get wet for a very long time. Clinging is precisely standing still in that rain, refusing to move. When the mind lets go, karma has no place to cling, and suffering naturally lightens. The human mind is very accustomed to clinging. When we encounter joy, we want to hold on to it forever. When we encounter sadness, we refuse to let it go. Some sufferings have passed a long time ago, but in our minds, we live with them every day. We retell the story of how we were hurt again and again. We repeat how we were treated unfairly. Each time, we rekindle old emotions, making them come alive as if it happened just yesterday. In reality, the circumstances have passed. The karma has largely ripened, but the clinging remains intact. And it is this clinging that makes us think that suffering has never left us. Some people cling to resentment. They believe that if they don't hold on to that resentment, the other person will not be punished. They don't realize that resentment doesn't hurt others. It exhausts themselves. Some people cling to the image of a victim. They are used to seeing themselves as wronged, disadvantaged, and from that, they lose the ability to see new opportunities. Some people cling to a glorious past, refusing to accept a diminished present. Some people cling to an imagined future, refusing to live fully in the present moment. Each type of clinging is an invisible rope that binds our minds. There is a very ordinary story about two people who went through a major adverse event together. They were business partners, trusting each other. Then, one day, due to circumstances and wrong decisions, both lost everything. Money was gone, reputation was lost, relationships gradually drifted away. The adverse event was the same for both. But how they lived afterward was completely different. The first person rehashed the old story every day, reminding himself who was wrong, who betrayed him, who caused him to fall into this situation. His heart was always full of anger and bitterness. Every time someone mentioned business, he would get angry. His life gradually narrowed into resentment. And even if external circumstances improved a little, his mind remained restless. The second person was also in pain, also sad, also regretful. But after a while, that person chose silence more often. Not because they forgot, but because they saw that rehashing it only made them more tired. That person began to rebuild from very small things, living simply, keeping their heart upright, doing no harm to anyone. When thinking of the old adverse event, that person reminded himself that it was karma ripening, and resentment would not bring anything back. Gradually, the mind settled. The pain remained as a memory, but it no longer carried the same weight as before, the same adverse event, the same karmic fruit. But one person suffered endlessly, while the other suffered lightly and moved on. The difference did not lie in the karma, but in the clinging. The one who harbored resentment held on to the past tightly, so suffering remained. The one who knew how to let go did not nourish suffering further, so when the karma passed, the mind also lightened. That story clearly shows that the real shackles are not what happened, but how we hold on to them in our hearts. In the scriptures, the Buddha taught that clinging is the direct cause of suffering. As long as there is clinging, attachment, and identification with emotions and circumstances, suffering cannot end. The Venerable Masters often reminded us that practitioners do not fear karma, only delusion. Delusion is not clearly seeing the impermanent nature of all phenomena. Delusion is thinking that this suffering is me, is my life, is my destiny. When awakened, we see that suffering is merely a stage, a phenomenon, a wave passing across the surface of the mind. The Buddha also taught that when the mind lets go, karma becomes still. This does not mean that karma immediately disappears, but that karma is no longer stirred up. Like sediment in a glass of water, if we keep stirring it, the water will always be cloudy. If we let it be, the sediment will gradually settle. Clinging is the stirring. Letting go is letting it be. When the mind is no longer stirred by regret, resentment, or fear, the ripening fruits of suffering also become much lighter. To practice letting go of clinging in daily life, you don't need to understand all profound doctrines. You just need to start by recognizing. Whenever suffering arises, try asking yourself what within you is clinging tightly. Is it an unfulfilled wish, a hurtful word, an image of yourself that you don't want to lose? When you recognize the object of clinging, you have walked half the path. The rest is to practice letting go little by little. No need to rush. A very simple exercise is to observe thoughts as you observe clouds drifting by. When a negative thought appears, You don't need to push it away, nor do you need to chase after it. You just need to know that you are thinking that way. Know it and let it be. Thoughts come and will go. If not nourished by strong emotions, you can also practice by returning to the body. When the mind is agitated, the body is often tense. Relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, breathe slower. When the body settles, the mind also settles. Another practice is to look at everything through the light of cause and effect, not to blame yourself or others, but to see that everything has its causes and conditions. When understood this way, we personalize suffering less. We no longer think that life is targeting us. We see ourselves as just a part of the great flow of causes and conditions, and that makes the mind feel less burdened. In daily life, you can try applying this spirit to very small things. When someone says something that bothers you, instead of carrying it all day, try to let it go immediately in the afternoon. When a plan doesn't work out, instead of blaming yourself forever, try to see it as a condition that was not yet sufficient. When recalling a painful past, try to see it as a story that has closed. No need to reopen it. Each time you can let go a little, you will feel a little lighter, like clearing out some clutter from an already crowded house. Applying this to life is not as difficult as we imagine. You can start with very small things, tidying up your living space to be neater, so your mind is also neater. Speaking kind words instead of trying to prove yourself right. Accepting that not everyone will understand you, and that's okay. When you stop trying to please everyone, you will have more energy to take care of yourself and the people who truly matter. Finally, remember that peace is not a gift bestowed from outside, but the result of how we treat our own minds every day. When the heart is at peace, life naturally follows suit in a very gentle way. And perhaps, at some point, you will realize that living simply doesn't make you lose anything. It only helps you retain what is truly precious. Then, even if life still has difficulties, you will no longer feel swept away, but can smile, breathe deeply, and continue with a more serene mind. Perhaps, by this final segment, you have sat with yourself for quite some time. Perhaps you have listened from beginning to end during a weary evening or a quiet afternoon when your heart didn't know who to share with. And right now, if there is still a little heaviness, a little lingering feeling within you, please allow the person speaking to you to sit beside you, not to lecture, not to advise, but just to be there and say, I understand. There is a weariness that needs no name. It is already too clear. Tired from trying without being recognized. Tired from living kindly, but often being the one who suffers disadvantage. Tired from always having to be strong, always pushing oneself so no one sees weakness. There are days when you don't cry, don't complain, still fulfill your duties. But when night falls, just a little bam, and tears fall on their own. Not because of extreme suffering, but because of enduring for too long. In this life, there are many people like you. They don't complain, don't make a fuss, they just quietly carry too much on their shoulders. Carrying responsibility for family, carrying parents' expectations, carrying the pressure to succeed, to be stable, to live in a way that doesn't fall behind others. And then one day, they find themselves so tired, they don't know where to let go. They hear people say, let go. But inside, they feel confused. If I let go of everything, is that giving up? If I let go a little, what should I let go of? If I let go, will life really be lighter? Or will it just add to the emptiness? If you have ever had these questions, you are not wrong, and you are not weak. According to Buddhist teachings, letting go is not abandoning life, but abandoning the way of holding on that causes suffering. The Buddha never taught people to abandon life or deny responsibility. He pointed out that the deep root cause of suffering is craving, I, and clinging, chap. Craving is attachment, the desire for everything to go your way. Clinging is rigidly holding on to views, emotions, self-image, and the image of others. When things don't go our way, we suffer. When we lose something, we hurt. When we compare, we feel disadvantaged. Letting go in Buddhism means letting go of that craving and clinging, not abandoning family, work, or human duties. There's a very important thing that many people often misunderstand. They think that letting go means letting go of everything. No longer caring, no longer loving, no longer trying. This very thought makes them fear letting go, because they still have so many precious things in life. But the truth is, no one asks you to let go of everything. This life doesn't require you to become a saint to find peace. Buddhist teachings are very practical and very compassionate. They simply say that if today you suffer because you are holding on to too much, then today, let go a little. Just a little is enough for the mind to have room to breathe. The human mind is used to holding on to things. We fear that if we don't worry, everything will collapse. Fear that if we don't think ahead, we will be left behind. Fear that if we don't push ourselves, we will be seen as weak. That fear makes us create pressure for ourselves. Sometimes no one pushes us, but we still push ourselves. Sometimes no one expects anything, but we still set very high expectations. And when we don't achieve them, we turn to blame ourselves. This cycle plays out day after day, making the mind constantly tense, like a violin string. In that state, even a small matter is enough to make us utterly tired. The more you can let go, the more peace you will find. This saying sounds simple, but the longer one lives, the truer it seems. Some people, just by letting go of an old grudge they carried for years, immediately find they sleep better. Some people let go of the habit of comparing their children to others' children and immediately feel warmth in their family relationships. Some people let go of the desire for others to understand them and immediately feel their hearts much lighter. No need to let go of everything. Just let go where it hurts the most. There is a small story that the writer once heard from an elderly man. He was an ordinary laborer, working hard his whole life. When he was young, he always thought he had to do more than others so his family would be respected. He took on work day and night, carried responsibilities that didn't belong to him, never dared to refuse anyone who asked for help. His heart was always tense until, in old age, his health deteriorated, and he was forced to stop. During his days in the hospital, he had a lot of time to reflect. He realized that many things he had tried to carry were actually unnecessary. Some things others could perfectly well take care of themselves. Some judgments from others, no matter how hard he tried, would never satisfy them. He said that if only he had let go a little earlier, perhaps he wouldn't have been so tired. That story is not to blame the past, but to remind us in the present You don't need to wait until you're utterly exhausted to allow yourself to lighten your load. You don't need to wait until illness strikes to learn how to let go. Right today, while you can still hear, still feel, you can begin. Letting go is not a grand act, but a series of very small choices in daily life. In the scriptures, the Buddha once taught that the wise do not carry unnecessary burdens. He likened the mind to a traveler. If the road is long and rocky, and one continues to carry more stones, each step will be harder. Those stones are resentment, excessive expectations, and stubborn clinging to being right or superior. When one stone is put down, the journey immediately becomes lighter. When many stones are put down, the steps naturally become firmer. No one forces the traveler to go empty-handed. Just don't carry more than you can bear. The Venerable Masters also often reminded us that practice, too, is not doing anything extraordinary, but turning inward to care for our minds in every small thing. One master said that whether one finds peace or not lies not in external circumstances, but in whether the mind is willing to stop. When the mind is willing to stop, to breathe, to reflect, then even if circumstances don't change, the heart is already different. That is letting go. Letting go of the mind that's always running, always demanding, always unwilling to rest. Right now, you can try a very gentle practice. No preparation is needed. Just sit still for a moment. If you are lying down, lie still. If you are sitting, sit with your back reasonably straight. Bring your attention to your breath. When inhaling, know that you are still alive. When exhaling, allow yourself to be at peace. No need to control the breath. Just be aware. If thoughts arise, that's okay. Just know that you are thinking. Then gently return to your breath. Each time you return is an act of letting go. Letting go of old thoughts, letting go of worries yet to come, letting go of past blame. You can silently tell yourself, breathing in, I know I am alive. Breathing out, I allow myself to be at peace. That saying is not a magic spell, but an allowance. Allowing yourself to slow down. Allowing yourself not to have to be strong right now. Allowing yourself to lighten, even if only for a few minutes. After practicing, you might not feel immediate peace. That is completely normal. The mind has been used to racing for a very long time. It cannot stop overnight. But each time you are willing to stop, willing to let go a little, you are sowing a very wholesome seed. That seed may not sprout immediately, but it will be there, waiting for the right conditions to bloom into a more steadfast peace. The message of this entire journey you have listened to is not to push you to be stronger, to try harder, to overcome at all costs. This video does not urge you to be more resilient, because perhaps you have been resilient long enough. It merely gently reminds you that you are allowed to lighten your load, to let go a little today, even if you don't know what tomorrow will bring. You are allowed to be imperfect, not to please everyone. You are allowed to choose peace for yourself, even if others don't understand. In daily life, you can apply this with very simple actions. When tired, allow yourself to rest, even for just a few minutes. When you don't want to argue, allow yourself to be silent. When you feel your heart straining to prove something, ask yourself if this is truly necessary for your peace. Each time you choose to lighten up, you are choosing to let go. And each time you let go, you move closer to peace. If today you are very tired, please remember that you don't need to let go of everything. Just letting go a little is enough. Let go of a thought that hurts you. Let go of an expectation that exhausts you. Let go of a role that no longer suits you. And as much as you can let go, that much peace you will find. No more, no less. Peace does not come from endlessly seeking, but from being willing to put things down. As these words conclude, I hope you do not rush up. Stay with yourself a little longer. Take a deep breath in. Exhale very slowly. Feel that you are still here, still have the opportunity to live differently, to live lighter. And even if life ahead holds many uncertainties, as long as you remember that you are allowed to let go a little, that path will no longer feel so heavy.